Hello and welcome to How to Get Over It with myself, Candice Mama, and my good friend, Justin Cohen. Today we're speaking about a big one, intrusive thoughts. What are intrusive thoughts, Jess?
So anxiety comes in different flavors. There are many different kinds of anxiety, right? But OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and panic and general anxiety. Now, intrusive thoughts could be part of any of those particular anxiety disorders, or one could find oneself with intrusive thoughts on their own. And an intrusive thought, in fact, the full term is actually a UIT, an unwanted intrusive thought. So an unwanted intrusive thought is a thought that keeps popping into your head without you being able to control it, to stop it, and it is a disturbing thought, right? It makes you anxious. That thought comes, your anxiety increases. So there are three main categories of intrusive thoughts that people have. So the one category is around sex. And you're going to see that each of these categories actually has to do with the taboo, something that is forbidden. So the sex could be about some sexual act that you are embarrassed about, that comes into your mind, that usually you have yourself not engaged in. But you then start thinking, well, do I want to engage in this because I'm having a thought about it? So it could be about having a sex with an animal. It could be having sex with a child. It could be having sex with the same sex, which of course is not a problem. That's homosexuality. There's no issue. But if you're somebody who is concerned about sexuality and believes that you should be straight, and now you're having homosexual thoughts, that can be very disturbing. So it's really any sexual act that is considered forbidden, right? Something that you don't want to do, right? But now it's coming into your mind. And along with that intrusive thought, there could actually be an intrusive sensation. So you might even find a genital response to the sexual thought. In fact, many people with these kinds of sexual thoughts will say, well, if I'm having a sexual thought about a child or about a relative, oh my gosh, am I actually enjoying this? They might then start to focus on their genital region, and the act of focusing on it will itself, as we'll discover, it's the monitoring itself that will often trigger a physiological response. So just because you're having that physiological response doesn't mean that deep down this is what you really want. But so you could have this intrusive thought along with an intrusive sensation. So those are the sexual thoughts. Then can you also have religious intrusive thoughts? So this would usually be somebody who is religious, who now has an intrusive blasphemous thought, right? And no less than Martin Luther himself struggled with these kinds of thoughts. So he would have intrusive, blasphemous thoughts about Jesus. In fact, he even had intrusive images. So it could be a thought, but it could also be an image. And the image that for him, this was an intrusive image, was actually something that was both religiously blasphemous and sexual. And that was the image of the devil's behind. He used to talk about the devil's behind coming to his mind, right? And of course, this can be enormously disturbing to somebody who is religious and follows all the religious tenets, does what they're supposed to, but then has these intrusive thoughts. And then the other category, which is very common, is violence. So probably the most common form of violent intrusive thought would be a mother towards her child, towards her baby. This is extremely high with women who have postpartum depression. In fact, some research shows that as many as 57% of women with postpartum depression actually have intrusive thoughts of harming their baby, right? But it could be violence towards an elderly person or a vulnerable person or even somebody who you really love, your children, your partner, right? So you can see these sorts of thoughts really go against what is socially acceptable, right? What is moral, right? What any person with some feeling and empathy would necessarily want to be doing, right? When we talk about the violence, right? The sex, not necessarily, because mutually consensual sex, between two adults, there's no real issue there. But here's the interesting thing, Ken, is that is that people who have these thoughts, these intrusive thoughts, and by the way, for people who have them, it can feel as if they are constant. Like when I say constant, they usually are not constant, but ask somebody who's having them, they will tell you it's all day, right? And they can't stop them. And they try various ways. And we'll talk about the way that people try and how these different ways that people try to stop them actually makes things worse. And we'll start to then talk, of course, about what we can do to reduce the anxiety around these thoughts. But here's what I want to be very clear about to anybody who's struggling with intrusive thoughts. So one of the big concerns that people have is, what does this say about me, right? So if I want to have sex with an animal, does it mean that my main sort of sexual preference is bestiality? You know, or if I want to harm my baby, does it mean that one day I'm going to harm my baby, right? That this thought is a reality, and I am now going to, you know, even against my will, find myself actually doing this. Now, I want to be absolutely categorical about this. People who have these thoughts are usually the last people to act on them. The last people. The vast majority, I'm talking, I don't want to put a specific figure on it, but it's like 98, 9%, right, of people are not going to be doing these things. Why? Because they don't want to. So let's just talk about the difference between somebody who does do these things. Let's say it's somebody who actually does rape a child, okay? The person who does rape a child wants to rape a child. That's what they want to do, right? So when they have the thought of raping a child, it does not cause them the same kind of guilt and shame, right? Now, let me just do a little bit of a qualification there. Yes, some people who actually do rape children will feel guilty about it, will have some remorse, but it's a very different psychological mindset to the person who acts on intrusive thought to the people who we're talking about here who actually have an anxiety disorder around intrusive thoughts. And the main difference is that the people with these intrusive thoughts feel bad about them, feel ashamed of them, feel guilty about them, consciously know that they don't want to do this. Okay, maybe that's even a better way to, they know they don't want to do this, but I've got to be careful here because they start to tell themselves, oh my gosh, maybe I do want to do this because I'm having this thought, right? So even that's not necessarily entirely accurate. I just want to make a very clear distinction that if you're having them, you feel guilty, ashamed, you really know that this is not something that is a very powerful urge, you just keep having these thoughts. That is what we call unwanted intrusive thoughts, whereas the people who act on them, they're usually not unwanted. So I think as a starter to anybody out there, know that you are highly, highly unlikely to be acting on these thoughts. And Ken, the other thing that I want to say, and to anybody struggling with intrusive thoughts, is there was a big study by a psychologist, Stanley Rachman, on a big group of students. And what he did was ask them about the kinds of thoughts that they have, unbidden, right? Thoughts that just come into their head. And he found that virtually every single person in this study at some point would have some kind of an unwanted intrusive thought, such as some bizarre sexual act, an act of violence towards a vulnerable or elderly person, if they're religious, some sort of blasphemous thought. So this is very common, okay? All humans will have an unwanted intrusive thought at some point, an unwanted intrusive image at some point, or an unwanted intrusive sensation, okay? So if you are having these, you are not broken, you're not defective, there's nothing wrong with you, okay? All that's happened is that through a process of learning, you have taught your brain that these thoughts are dangerous, threatening because of what they may say about you. And so you've raised your anxiety towards them, and in trying to stop and avoid them, right, you've taught your brain that they're dangerous. And so then whenever they come, you experience this anxiety, right? Whereas most people who would have an unwanted intrusive thought would go, oh, you know, they'd ignore it. They wouldn't pay much attention. It's nothing, whatever, right? So that's a little bit odd, right? It's a very different response to going, oh my God, what does that say about me? Right? So this is the key difference, right? So if you have intrusive, everybody has them. It's your response to them which determines whether you'll have an anxiety disorder or not. That's it. It's your response. If you say this doesn't mean a whole lot, it doesn't say a whole lot about me, it's not important, then they're going to go away, right? But if you say, this is really important, oh my God, what does it say about me? Oh my God, I'm a psychopathic murderer or a rapist, or now, whenever that thought comes, you're going to sound the alarm. That's what anxiety is. It's sounding the alarm, saying problem, 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 problem. You're going to raise your heart rate's going to go up. You're going to go danger, danger, threat, right? And now I've got to keep monitoring. I've got to be on the outlook for when these thoughts and sensations arise, and what you look for, you will find. So it means that now that you're looking, you're finding them all the time. And whenever you're finding them, you're freaking out, right? Because you told yourself this is bad, right? You've decided I'm a bad person because I have this thought, right? The person who's unaffected about it goes, I'm not a bad person because I have a thought. It's just a thought.
Wow. Josh, you touched on the fact that all of us will have intrusive thoughts at one point or another. But what I want to expand on is what causes it to become a disorder. So what causes some people to completely release it? And then for other people, it really becomes an anxiety disorder.
Right. So that's a really great question. Why, for some people, does it become a disorder? For others, it doesn't. And simply it's the response. So if you decide that having this thought says that you are a bad person or have some sexual deviance or are going to burn in hell, right? You've essentially put up the danger sign, right? Whenever this enters your mind. And that means now that when it enters your mind again, there's going to be the danger and the bells are going to sound, right? The person, again, who says there's no issue, then it doesn't matter. And they're not looking for it. So they're not monitoring to see if it's there. So it doesn't come back, right? I mean, let's think about a mother. So firstly, most mothers have had intrusive thoughts about harming their kids, right? But for most, it's a thought that pops into their head or whatever. That's it. There's no issue. The mother, it becomes an issue. She goes, oh my gosh, did I just have a thought about harming my kid? Oh my gosh, what does that say about me? Does that mean that I could do this? That I could actually murder my own child? I'm a bad, evil person. I'm terrible. I can't even be trusted with my kid, right? Do you see it's the story that they're telling about that thought, which then determines whether the thought itself will raise anxiety. If you say, it's just a thought, doesn't say anything about me. Everybody has these thoughts. And you know, for anybody saying, really, does everybody have thoughts? Yes. Look, here's the thing. We are multifaceted. You know, we forget this. We think we're all these lovely, civilized, beautiful, you know, sophisticated human beings. We've got some impulses. We've got violent impulses. We've got sexual impulses. We've got some very uncouth impulses, right? And society, in fact, a good way to understand this is actually Freud's model. So Freud, and this is just a model, right? And models, you know, all models are wrong. Some are just more helpful than others, okay? So what I mean by this is the brain's complex, but it's useful to think of the brain in this way. So Freud described our minds in terms of three main components. There was the id. Now the id is your impulses, your sexual violence, whatever it is that you want to do. Imagine there was no social constraints, no prison, no law, no parenting. Imagine kids were just left to their own devices. Go for it, go wild. Yeah, what would emerge, right? Without parenting, without socialization. Now, I'm not saying that they would necessarily all kill each other all the time, because I don't think that's true either, because we also have strong needs for love and connection, and we have empathy. But we have some very, very strong impulses that left unchecked. Yeah, when you were angry with someone, come on, who hasn't wanted to smash somebody in the face? Come on, who hasn't wanted to kill someone? I mean, think about even the way we talk about it. Oh, God, I could have killed him. That's not just a metaphor, right? I mean, there's a certain reality in that. Yes, sometimes you want to kill him, literally. So that's the id, right? These are the untamed impulses. Then if you think about it as sort of building up, the id sort of being on the bottom, let's go to the top for the moment. At the top, you've got the superego. Now, the superego is your conscience. That is your morality. That is your sense of right and wrong. That is the part that says, look, I might want to kill you. I might even really think you're a bad person who should die, but killing people is not a good thing to do. Even though I want to, it's not a good thing to do because, you know, we can't live together in society in a civilized way if we just go around killing and raping each other, right? So I have the superego of mine, which says, you know, this is the morality, these are my social standards. And what we get through our parents, we get it through schooling, yeah, and we get it through our education. Now the ego sits in the middle. So you've got the id, the ego, the superego. The ego is, in a sense, the bridge between id and superego. The ego is dealing with those impulses and dealing with those social constraints to find the best way to behave, right? So the ego, I know when we think of ego, we think of vanity, and that's not what Freud meant by ego. He actually meant ego was the sort of your conscious self. This is who you think you are. Like when somebody says, you know, I'm a nice, good person, that's their ego, right? If they went to their id, they'd go, oh, I'm not such a great, nice person, right? And if they went to their superego, they'd say, I'm the most prim and proper, perfect person, right? So the ego is this kind of bridge between those two. So if you think about the mother, she has this impulse, I want to kill my kid. Or actually, often for that mother, it's an image of strangling the kid or taking a knife and stabbing the kid. It'd be a really violent image. So this image comes to mind. Now that creates enormous internal conflict for her, right? Because she's got this idea of herself of being a good mother. In fact, by the way, most people with these intrusive thoughts, particularly mothers, are actually extremely good mothers. Those are the most attentive mothers. Those are the mothers who are so loving and caring and you know, do so much for their kids, right? More so. You can imagine, like if it's a mother who's actually quite careless and those thoughts wouldn't, you know, it's not an issue, right? It's the mother who is so focused and conscientious. In fact, the mother who's really connected to that superego, you know, the right way to bring up a child and the love and the care. Now, boom, from the unconscious, this image pops up, right? Of being violent towards a kid. That is extremely disturbing to a person who has the sense of themselves as this very moral person, right? So that woman, if she then goes, now, oh, what does this say about me? I'm bad, I'm evil. Then she's got to stop those thoughts. In whatever way possible, she's got to stop. She's got to suppress them. She's got to push them away. You know, if she's religious, she's got to go do a prayer. Yeah. Oh my God, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. She might even start doing a ritual, a strange sort of ritual that says, okay, or she might do an absolution. She might even punish herself. Oh, that was so bad. Let me punish myself, right? So again, the problem is now anything she does in response to those thoughts or sensations or images actually reinforces them. This is what is so counterintuitive. She thinks, oh no, I'm pushing them away. And the truth is she can push them away to a degree, because you can push them away. But she's just told her brain, she's just said, this is threatening. I need to avoid it. The brain goes, oh boy, that's threatening. I better tell you whenever there's the vaguest inkling of this in your mind so that you can push it away. Do you see the cycle that emerges? Thought comes in, push it away. It's dangerous, right? The next time thought comes in, I've got to keep pushing it away, right? And so we actually call this negative reinforcement. It's actually the way all fears are learned. If you recall, this is what John Watson discovered with little Albert. Little Albert, this little rat, loved the rat, played with it. He made a loud noise behind his head when he played with the rat, and then little Albert tried to crawl away from the rat. And even when he stopped making the noise, little Albert still tried to crawl away from the rat. And that proved that fear is learned, because he wasn't scared of the rat, but it was the noise that made him scared. But even when the noise stopped, he was still scared. And then whenever he moved away, he wasn't giving his brain the chance to learn that it was no longer scary. So if whenever an intrusive thought comes into my head, I try and push it away through a prayer, through deep breathing, through even trying to relax or do something like that, I'm telling my brain this is dangerous, right? It's threatening. And by not letting it just be there, I'm not letting my brain learn that actually it's not threatening. It can actually be there. It doesn't actually do anything, because thoughts don't do anything, right? It's behavior that does something. And so this teaches my brain, right? It teaches my brain to be scared of these thoughts, right? The negative reinforcement is that by avoiding, I'm reinforcing the fact that this is something dangerous that I need to avoid. Yeah.
Wow, Jess. And I mean, this is something you're passionate about because you yourself have struggled with intrusive thoughts. Do you want to tell us your experience with them?
Right. So the whole transcender movement and program started because of my own anxiety. So I'd struggled as a kid, but when I studied psychology and started to apply all these processes and meditation and relaxation and positive thinking and self-hypnosis, all of these things really helped me and turned me into, I think, one of the happiest adults. And then about, now it's 6-7 years ago already, I got into a major conflict with someone, and it really turned ugly. And this conflict in itself was not so terrible, but it triggered these intrusive thoughts of being sexually assaulted by this person. And, because I was pretty psychologized, I actually was not overly concerned about those thoughts in the beginning, because I was like, okay, this is strange. I'm a student of the mind. Like, what's going on here? Maybe it's because I felt emasculated by this person. Maybe it's, and I started to think, well, maybe it's actually got to do with some childhood sexual abuse that I'd been through. What was interesting is that this person looked a lot like my childhood sexual abuser. And also I'd grown up with domestic violence. My father was violent, and my father was often passive aggressive, and then he would explode. He'd explode into rage. He'd hit my mother. He had a gun. I mean, it was really scary growing up like this. And this person, of course, they weren't as aggressive as that, but they also used a lot of passive aggression. So there were sort of these outbursts of aggression, and then they would just ignore me and sort of, walk past me and just sort of look the other way. And so it was possible that triggered, right, some of that early childhood fear. Now, initially, I did my usual processes, right? So when the thoughts came, I was really an effective meditator. I'd done 10-day silent Buddhist meditation retreats. I loved meditation. I'd even created my own meditational process that I taught and wrote about. So when these thoughts came, I thought, okay, what's meditation about? Let me just, meditate them away, or even in my own mind, use certain affirmations and visualizations to let go. I also knew how to control my heart rate. I've got relaxation processes that are extremely powerful. So as these thoughts come, I would just go, just relax. Because remember, Ken, for me, so unlike a mother who's going, these thoughts say that I could be a violent person, that's what makes them so disturbing. That wasn't me. I wasn't going, oh, these thoughts mean that he is actually going to harm me, or these thoughts are questioning my sexuality, or there was nothing about it in an obvious sense that was problematic for me about the thoughts, other than that they were unpleasant and disturbing. The thoughts themselves, but usually for most people with intrusive thoughts, it's what the thoughts say about them rather than the actual thought, right? I suppose what I felt these thoughts were saying about me was that I was losing control of my mind, right? So it wasn't so much this conflict was really not pleasant, and obviously the childhood sexual abuse of my father, but the childhood sexual abuse and the domestic violence of my father, and those things I had dealt with before, and I was pretty much, I'd integrated them, they'd felt resolved. of course, I started to question that now because of this. But in retrospect, I can now see that the reason these thoughts were disturbing was, I was the guy who was teaching people how to master their minds. I was teaching meditation. I was teaching these psychological processes, and I felt like I was losing control of my mind. So that was actually, and by the way, this is usually, it's not the intrusive thought that's the problem. It's actually the secondary thought. It's the thought about the thought, right? It's a thought that says, okay, I'm having the sexual thought. That means that I am, into bestiality, or, into some, unusual form of sex, or I will burn in hell, right? Yes, I just had this blasphemous thought. Not the blasphemous, it's the thought that means I will burn in hell, right? So for me, yes, I'm having this intrusive thought of being sexually assaulted. I know it seems like, oh, that was the big problem. No, the big problem was, I was like, I guess I've got a thought. I already knew that back then. Big deal. So it's just a thought. But there was like, oh, gosh, I can't control this. Like, this is not going away, right? And so what I didn't realize was that the things that I was doing, which sound very good, don't they? Meditation, visualization, positive thinking. I even had this whole thing of love. Like, whenever the thoughts came in, I would just go, love to this person I was in this conflict with. I was just like, I was going to be the love guy. I thought, great, I'll use it as an association. Whenever it comes in, I'm going to go with love. And it kind of works, by the way, these things. Suppression, love, praying to Jesus. If you're having a blasphemous thought, you're going to feel better immediately. But remember, what's happening is you're teaching your brain that there's a problem. And if your brain thinks there's a problem, then whenever that thought pops in, it's going to sound the anxiety alarm, right? So I didn't realize that's exactly, I remember going into meditation. It was one of the most blissful meditations of my life, because I'd had a lot of intrusive thoughts that morning. I sat down and I was like, oh, because it can really focus your attention when you don't want to think about something. Boy, so suppression can be very effective temporarily, but I was on cloud nine. And as I came out of that meditation, oh, boy, did those thoughts just rebound. They assaulted me. It was a lot like an anti-anxiety drug. An anti-anxiety drug will quieten your anxiety. It'll quieten the intrusive thoughts. I know, because I tried these drugs. But afterwards, you have a rebound effect. It's like trying to stop a hose pipe with your hand. You can do it. But sooner or later, that water is going to build up and it's going to explode, right? So I realized after some time that all of these things, NLP and positive thinking, all these things that I was actually using to stop the thoughts was really effectively making them worse. By the way, I even tried something which is so bizarre when I think about it now, which was to punish myself. So if I had the thoughts, I thought, well, look, I'm going to use a form of negative reinforcement, which is that the moment I have the thoughts, I'm going to smack myself. And let me be clear. Like, if anybody's out there who's ever tried that, to punish yourself physically or mentally, because people do that as well. Oh, I can't believe you, they'll beat themselves up because they've had the thought. That will only make it worse. Why? So let's talk about a very tragic form of therapy that was created, I think as far back as the 60s or 70s, and it's called conversion therapy. Now, conversion therapy was used on people who were homosexual to stop them being homosexual. Now, for many of these people, they themselves wanted to do the therapy, right? So they felt they were not at ease about their homosexuality. Although you have to understand why that was the case, because they were also living in a different era where there was a great deal of opprobrium towards homosexuality, which, by the way, in many parts of the world, there still is today. So psychologists back then, because by the way, to tell you how psychology develops, I think as late as could be 79 or 80, in the DSM, homosexuality was still considered a mental disorder. So there was this therapy, and conversion therapy was that you would look at images, homosexual images, sexual images, and then you would get electric shocks as you watch these images. Amazing. I went to Rhodes University, and there was a professor there who used to do this therapy in the 80s. And let me tell you, Rhodes is not, it's a wonderful liberal progressive university. They don't do this for decades, but there was a time in my own university, there were psychologists who were doing this therapy. Now, let's just put aside the questions about trying to change somebody's sexual preference, right? For a moment. Let's look at whether this could even be possible. Let's say that there wasn't a question. If you wanted to change your sexuality, you know, hey, listen, maybe you were straight and you wanted to become gay. So now whenever you watch straight sexuality, will just electrically shock you. Would this be effective? Because in some way, you probably think, well, why not? Like, surely, if you're associating punishment to something, think about John Watson with little Albert and his rat. Whenever little Albert's playing with his rat, he smashes a bar against the pan behind his head. He loved the rat. After the horrible noise, he now hates the rat. So if you think about it, you could apply that to sexuality. You could say, well, let's show you sexual images. We'll smash something behind your head whenever you watch the images, or we'll give you an electric shock, right? So in a sense, you could think, well, isn't it the same? Wouldn't that actually work? Now, the reason that it might work with, and why it does work with little Albert and his rat, and why it doesn't work with something like this is twofold. One is that sexuality has a very, very strong genetic component, right? So these sexual preferences are very, very much ingrained. I'm not saying that there is some environmental components as well, but particularly if we think of sexuality on a continuum, which is actually far more accurate. People think, oh, you're either gay or you're straight or you're bi. Actually, there's a continuum. You could be extremely straight, extremely homosexual, or roundabout in the middle. Most people actually, they don't realize it. They're actually not on either extreme of that end. But wherever they are tends to be fairly well ingrained, right? Now, so to then punish somebody when they have, it's a little bit like punishing somebody when you put food in front of them so that they won't want to eat food anymore, right? It's not going to work, right? I mean, I can give you a whole beautiful plate of your favorite food and smash a bar, give you an electric shock. You're not going to stop loving that food, okay? So same with sexuality. Your sexual preference, you're not going to, it doesn't work, for one. But two, you're also raising stress levels, right, when you punish someone. So you're actually creating more anxiety. And when you create more anxiety, you create more of the very thing that you don't want, that you currently are anxious about, which is the intrusive thought, right? In this case, about your sexuality. You with me? So conversion therapy, even when it was practiced by psychologists who didn't have any moral issue with it, was never effective. Sadly, there are still places in the world that tends to be within certain churches, particularly in the United States, where conversion therapy is being practiced, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. All it does is create more conflict, more shame, more psychological discomfort. That's what it does, okay? It doesn't work. So why this big segue into conversion therapy? Because conversion therapy might seem like this abomination and this kind of weird thing that, doesn't work. I think all of us have probably tried a bit of conversion therapy in our lives in one way. And I'm not talking about converting ourselves sexually. I mean, converting ourselves from eating too much, converting ourselves from being lazy in front of the TV, converting ourselves from an intrusive thought. How do we convert ourselves sometimes? By punishing ourselves. Oh my gosh, I had that thought, smack. This is literally what I did. Eh? And I did it deliberately because I was kind of using it sort of a psychological process and smack myself, right? But we don't always smack ourselves. We do it in our heads. You idiot. You useless. You bum. Yeah? Like a friend of mine who is not overweight, but even if she was, this would not be appropriate. She calls herself fatty. Why? Because she's convinced if she calls herself fatty, then it'll motivate her to go to gym. Nothing could be further from the truth. Self-shaming, self-punishment does not increase healthy eating. It does not increase exercise. Why? It creates more stress. More stress actually leads you to comfort eat and not to exercise. So if self-shaming worked, I'd say knock yourself out. It doesn't work. Don't do it. Self-punishment doesn't work. Self-compassion, far more effective in getting you to do the things that you need and want to do, right? So when you have something that you didn't follow your diet, or you didn't do something that you wanted to, or you have that intrusive thought, you're kind to yourself, you're gentle to yourself. You're like, okay, this is sore, this is painful, I'm frustrated, but I'm okay. I'm not a bad person, and I'm trying my best. A much, much, much better approach here. So we were talking about my own situation. So I really tried it all. So I went to depth therapy. Depth therapy is when you go back to your childhood experiences. So I relived the childhood sexual abuse that I'd gone through, the violence that I experienced with my father, and had a great catharsis. Catharsis where you have this, when you relive a trauma, you have this emotional outpouring, you actually feel a lot better. It's actually very soothing. And that all happened to me, right? So I felt a lot better. Within a day or two, my anxiety and my intrusive thoughts were back. So anybody out there who's going to what we call depth therapy, psychoanalysis, Freudian-based therapy, where you're going back into your childhood to resolve your intrusive thoughts, it's not effective. It's not effective for anxiety. It can be effective in terms of better understanding yourself, but honestly, just not particularly effective for any of the anxiety disorders. And if anything, can actually increase anxiety and intrusive thoughts, because you're still saying, oh my gosh, there's something from my past that is making me have these bad thoughts. So if I resolve that thing, then they'll go away. Oh, I try. Have they gone away? Have they gone away? No, they're still there. Well, of course they're still there, because you're looking for them. You're looking for them, right? That's why they're still there. And if you're going to this therapy to make them stop, you're telling your brain this is a problem, they need to stop. And so whenever they pop into your head, you're going to get anxious, right? And the actual effort to try to stop them is actually what is fueling them here, right? So I tried anti-anxiety drugs, Xanax, which is a benzodiazepine. It operates on a neurochemical in the brain called GABA, which is the brain's own natural relaxant, very similar to alcohol. When I say very similar, they feel different, but they both activate GABA. But like alcohol, long-term use of anti-anxieties like benzodiazepines and alcohol will make anxiety worse. Why? Because just like anything that you're using to try and stop it, you're telling your brain it's dangerous, right? So if you're taking a drug because you're saying, this thought, this image is bad, yes, I feel better on the drug, but I feel worse later because it's going to pop back up, and I've told myself it's bad. Right? So if you remember, it's not the thought, it's the thought about the thought. It's the thought about the thought. People think that I used to say, my intrusive thoughts are the problem. No, my intrusive thoughts were not the problem. It was my thoughts about those thoughts that were the problem. It was my interpretation of the thoughts. And that's why there is value in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all about your interpretation, right? This is age-old wisdom. Hamlet, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. That thought is not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing. It's just a thought. It will become a problem if you tell yourself, if you interpret it, right? This, by the way, is the second strategy of the art of life in Transcender, right? Which is reinterpretation. So I think what we really focus in for anybody out there who's got intrusive thoughts, is check your interpretation, all right? So if you are currently thinking you are defective or broken, that's not true. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. Okay? The only reason you have them to a greater degree, and the reason they become a problem, is because you think that they're a problem, right? So everybody has them. We know that. Okay. Number two, you think that these thoughts are going to make you act on them. Not true. We know that. The research tells us that. It's virtually everybody who has these kinds of intrusive thoughts will not act on them. Okay, so you're not going to act on them. You think that this says something bad about you. No, it doesn't. If you're religious, Martin Luther, no less than Martin Luther, used to have almost continual blasphemous thoughts. Okay, so maybe you're closer to Jesus than Martin Luther, but the fact is, somebody no less than Martin Luther has had those thoughts and had them continuously. Okay, so having the thoughts is not the problem. In fact, we know that people actually have those sorts of blasphemous thoughts are actually usually very, very stringent about their religion. They actually are some of the people who follow their religion far more than most other people. In other words, those thoughts could well actually be an indication of the extent to which you're actually following the word of your particular holy book. And by the way, everyone has them, these sorts of intrusive blasphemous thoughts. Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, it's common. And it's actually common amongst very religious people. So let's just check our interpretation. No problem with these thoughts, okay? There is not an issue here. Right? This is not, and I really want to emphasize this, Ken, because these thoughts can be enormously disturbing to people. And I know, okay? So I know, if you're out there, please understand, I know, okay? Because I can tell you that my intrusive thoughts produced another set of intrusive thoughts. And those are suicidal thoughts. Now, I was so locked in to these intrusive thoughts. It kind of feels like being in a prison of your own mind. You know, if you think about it, something's wrong in the world, you can go out there and you can maybe do something about it, or you can kind of try and fix it. Now, if it's your own mind, there's no escape, you know, it can get very, very scary for people if you think these thoughts are a real problem, right? If these thoughts are really dangerous and say this terrible thing about you, and, you know, for me, probably the biggest thought about the thoughts was, they'll never go away. They'll suck all the joy out of my life. I'll never be able to just be okay. I'll never be able to control my own mind. Those are the thoughts. Again, ironically, it wasn't the thoughts, it was those thoughts about losing my mind, right? And then, of course, what thoughts come when you feel that desperate? It's thoughts of suicide. It's like, okay, that's the only way out. I don't know how else to do this. I mean, I was sitting on a plane to Cape Town, most beautiful city in the world. I was going to go do a presentation to 500 financial advisors. I was meeting the girl of my dreams at my oceanfront apartment. I mean, my life externally looked like the dream. And all I could think of was this airplane just taking a nosedive into the ground. Not because I wanted anybody else to get hurt, but this was the only way I could imagine to end this suffering, just these thoughts that I could not stop, right? So suicidal thoughts often are a result of our response to those initial intrusive thoughts, just because it's the only way that people can imagine getting out of it, right? And then those thoughts can be quite repetitive, yeah. And then now all of a sudden you get these continual thoughts of killing yourself. Now, if you do have intrusive thoughts of suicide, again, please know that if you've got intrusive thoughts of suicide, just like the other intrusive thoughts, it doesn't mean that you need to do this, have to do this. Certainly not because of the intrusive thoughts, because we're going to show you exactly how to totally dissolve your anxiety about these thoughts and actually lift them. Okay, we're going to show you how to do that. But even if you ever have a suicidal intrusive thought, remember, it's just a thought, right? And again, these are very common, very common. So how do you respond to those suicidal thoughts? It's just a thought. Just a thought. That's it, right? So we'll come back again to a procedure which you can use when they come. But I just want to say to anybody who's listening that, you know, if you're there, I know what it's like. I was there myself, and I promise you, that's why I'm doing this. That's why I do Transcendent. That's why I do this program, because I promised myself if I found a way to get through this, to get over this, that I would share this with the world, right? And that's why Cam and I are here sharing this with you. And this was my commitment. So I want you to know I was there, and I got over it, and I'm going to show you how to do the same. Okay, that's what we're going to do here.
Wow, Jess, thank you for your vulnerability and for sharing that with us. And I mean, you just spoke about, you tried drugs, you tried, you know, therapy, you tried the holy grail for, I think, the spiritual community, meditation, and none of it worked for you. So how did you get over it?
So, I want to mention one other treatment that I tried, which was the most effective. It didn't enable me to get over it, but it was the most effective. And the treatment is called exposure therapy. Now, exposure therapy is a very effective form of treatment for anxiety. It actually was created at the University of Cape Town in the 1950s here in South Africa, and it is now used around the world for anxiety and particularly for intrusive thoughts. So let me just say that I tried it, and I'm going to share with you my experience, because it was more effective than anything else that I've ever tried, but it still wasn't completely effective. I'll tell you what was effective, and I'm going to share that with you in the session, but I want you to understand what exposure is about, because it also tells us something about what we need to do to heal from anxiety. Exposure therapy is a very simple form of therapy. And it is essentially based on the idea that anxiety is a response to perceived threat. Fear is a response to real threat, right? So with fear, yes, it's appropriate, right? If there's a tiger, you need to fight or flight. You need to run away. The problem is, if you have a thought of, say, having sex with animals or hurting your child, well, that's actually not a real threat, right? But the brain responds to it as if it was a real threat. That's why we call it anxiety. It's a perceived threat, yeah? It's a perceived threat. So adrenaline, cortisol increase, the blood is shunted to the muscles where it's needed to fight or flight, but there's nothing to fight or flight because it's in my head, right? This is what makes anxiety so disturbing, because it's not out there. There's nothing out there that can make it go away. It's in here, right? So as long as you perceive a threat internally, you are going to be scared. But because that threat is not a real threat that you can actually really do anything about, it just sits there, right? So the concept of exposure therapy is based on that initial insight from John Watson in the 1920s, that avoidance is the way anxiety is sustained. So, for instance, let's say that you have a fear of heights. So you avoid, or lifts. So you avoid going in the lift. You avoid, and you always take the stairs, right? So now, when you avoid the lift, you feel better. You do feel better. But the problem is, now there aren't any stairs and you have to take the lift. You go into the lift, you're terrified, because all this time you've been telling your brain lifts are really bad, and whenever you go in, you get all scared, or you have to drink alcohol before you go in, so you dampen your stress response. But essentially, you're telling your brain bad, right? So exposure therapy says what you need to do to get over your fear of lifts is you have to get into the lift. Okay, you have to get into. What do you have to do to get over your fear of crowds? Go into crowds. What do you have to do to get over your fear of going to the shops? What do you have to get fear of going through? Any anxiety that you have about anything, exposure says you need to go in there. You need to expose yourself to it. Now, this can be a little bit overwhelming. In the Transcendent Method, we've got a 5-step process that you can use to get over virtually any. And I find this very effective for external fears. As you'll see, I haven't found it quite as effective for internal, but we'll get to that in a moment. So for instance, if you've got a fear of public speaking, the first thing would be to expose yourself to public speaking. Now, initially you can do it in your imagination. We call this in vitro exposure. So you could just imagine yourself public speaking, right? Then you could maybe speak to one person, then 2 people, then 3 people. So that's what we mean by a graduated approach, right? The second step of the process is to do it something every day. So every day, imagine yourself going through that particular behavior that you're scared of, either imagining or actually doing it. Number 3 is when you're there, don't leave when your anxiety is still very high. So measure your anxiety. If your anxiety is extremely high, leave the situation only when it drops a little bit. And that teaches your brain, oh, look, it's actually not that bad. You didn't die. Everything's good, right? And the other point is feel the fear and do it anyway, right? So exposure spikes anxiety. It's actually going to make you feel worse at first, but better later. This is the key reason why the most effective treatments for anxiety are the ones that are most neglected and resisted by people. Because the most effective treatments for anxiety raise anxiety at first. You feel worse at first. All this time you've been trying to avoid, so you feel better. That's the problem. Avoidance makes you feel better at first, worse later. Exposure makes you feel worse at first, but better later, right? Because your brain realizes, oh, actually public speaking is okay. I'm not going to die. I can deal with it. Or even rejection. It's a big one. People have this fear of rejection. Okay, I got rejected. Big deal. It's okay. But if you keep avoiding being rejected, rejection becomes scarier and scarier and scarier and scarier. Okay, it's like watching a horror movie. You watch it the first time, you're terrified. You watch it the 50th, you're bored. It's the same with spiders. It's the same with heights. It's the same with presentations. Whatever you want to get over, as long as it's not actually threatening. Right? If it's something that's actually, like, you should not expose yourself to a hot stove, because that's a real external threat. That's a fear. You should be scared of touching the hot stove. Okay? But anything that is not intrinsically threatening, dangerous, then no, you should simply, over time, expose yourself to it. So, exposure therapy says what you need to do for intrusive thoughts is expose yourself to them. When they come, certainly don't push them away. Embrace them. Engage them, run towards them. Say, bring on those thoughts. In fact, deliberately think them. Think them. Like, so exposure therapy would say for you could do this for an hour a day. And I did this, by the way. I did about 20 days of this. Every day, I would wake up, and for about 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, I would deliberately think these thoughts. Deliberately think them. And then you even make worse thoughts. And you go into all these, the worst thoughts you can possibly think of. And you just flood your mind with them. You can also write them down and then read them to yourself. You can write them down, record them, and play it into a tape. And so the whole idea is that all this time you've been trying to run away, instead of running away, now you run towards. And in running towards, it's scary at first, but I can tell you, when I used to do this for 30, 40 minutes, by the end of that 30, 40-minute session, my anxiety was low. I could have these thoughts and my anxiety was low. And then exposure therapy would teach you that throughout the day, if the thoughts ever come in, actually bring them on, think them yourself. Don't push them away. Right? I can tell you this is very effective in terms of taking off the tops of the anxiety. It was effective for me. It was definitely, it reduced my anxiety, right? But it didn't make the thoughts go away. And that's okay, right? Because you could say, well, it doesn't matter if the thoughts don't go away because there's no problem with the thoughts. No, but the thoughts were still pretty omnipresent. I think one of the problems of exposure therapy for intrusive thoughts is two. I think there's two problems. And, I'm doing my doctorate at Middlesex at the moment, and this is one of the things that I'm actually exploring because, exposure is a very effective therapy, but I have reservations for intrusive thoughts. And the one is that if whenever the thought comes into your head, you should run towards it and engage it, it does mean that you're stimulating the underlying neurochemistry of those thoughts, right? So it's like, if you constantly think anything, you're going to keep it in your head, right? So yes, you're going to feel less nervous about it, less anxious about it, but it's still you're keeping it alive, you're firing it up, right? So definitely it'll reduce anxiety, but it's still very present. So that's the one, I think, problem with it. And the second problem, I think, is that in doing this procedure, it's still a procedure to stop the thoughts. So it's still, what I would find is like, I would do it, but then I'd still be looking to see, is it working? Is it stopping? Are they still there? Aren't they there? Do you know what I mean? It might not entirely be the fault of the therapeutic treatment, but I still think that it's this thing that whenever they come, I must do this. And the problem is that, remember, anxiety thrives on you doing something whenever you feel anxious. Because in doing that, you're telling your brain there's a problem. So even though by exposure, you are keeping in your mind and saying, look, it's okay, I'm even going to bring it here, you're still doing this procedure, to make it stop. So the reason that I'm mentioning it, even though it was not entirely effective for me, is that there's a principle within exposure that is important to understand. I would rather people were doing exposure than trying to suppress. Suppression doesn't work. So rather run towards than run away. Rather run towards, definitely, hands down, absolutely. Because if you're running away, you're telling your brain that there's a problem. Whereas if you're running away, as I say, it's certainly my experience, it won't make it go away, but it will reduce some of the anxiety because it's saying, look, if I'm running, the brain figures, if you're running towards it, it's probably not that dangerous, right? It's probably not that threatening. So the principle there that is certainly valuable is the idea of not trying to suppress. So I want anybody out there to just imagine, try not to think of a pink elephant. Try not to think of it. I mean, take a minute or two and really try your best. Like, close your eyes right now and think, okay, don't think of a pink elephant. Don't think of you think of a pink elephant, aren't you, Ken? You are. All right. Now, if I said to you, look, Ken, for the next 2 minutes, if a pink elephant comes into your mind, it's okay. Yeah. Don't try to think of it. Don't try not to think of it. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. Over the next 2 minutes, is a pink elephant going to come into your mind? Probably. But the research tells us to a far lesser degree than if you try to stop a pink elephant coming into your mind. This is very important. And I urge anybody with intrusive thoughts, try the experiments on yourself. Take 2 minutes to think really hard of not thinking of a pink, and then 2 minutes where if it comes in, it's okay, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And then you might even want to try that with your intrusive thought as well. For 2 minutes, try really hard to stop it. And then for 2 minutes, just if it comes, it comes. And you will see for yourself. Just do the experiments. By the way, I did a huge amount of experimentation on myself. You can see it. It's very clear. The research even tells us that if you try to suppress the thoughts of chocolate, and you are then given chocolate, the choice of eating chocolate and chocolate to eat, you will eat double the amount of chocolate if beforehand you try to suppress the thought of chocolate. So, yeah. Trying to suppress cravings. Trying to suppress is not an effective technique. Just isn't, right? So what I realized is that all of these techniques and processes, meditation, relaxation, which in and of themselves are not bad. I mean, they can be very healthy just if you use them in your life. But if you're using them to stop an intrusive thought or stop an intrusive image or to stop a sensation or to stop, even the sort of feeling of anxiety, you're going to create more alarm for yourself when these thoughts and sensations arise. And so, at the time, my anxiety and intrusive thoughts, what I really wanted was, I really wanted to know what to do. There's like, just tell me what to do. I was, because I was, a postgraduate degree in psychology. And so one of my defense mechanisms, by the way, these old defense mechanisms, was reading research papers and books and different treatment options and looking at all these things that, trying different processes. But by the way, every new process always works in the beginning because you've got the placebo effect. So you go, okay, I've got this new thing that I'm going to try. And you go, yeah, it works. But actually, it's just that you've in a sense, you've gone, there's no threat anymore. There's no threat, there's no danger because I found the solution. But of course, you're still trying to stop it. And so that's why it will rise again. So that was a big defense mechanism that I used. I was constantly looking and trying different permutations, different kinds of meditation, different kinds of positive things, different kinds of, right? And all of those different things were still saying bad, it must stop. So at the time though, what I was really looking for was what could I do? And it's now very clear to me that there's one thing you need to do and there's one thing that you need to stop. And the one thing that you need to do is allow the thoughts to be there. And by just letting them be there, and I know initially it's uncomfortable, sensations come, and we're going to talk about how to deal with those. But if you can just allow them to be there, in effect, what you're doing is you're doing a bit of internal exposure where you're just allowing it, right, without running away. Now, this is different to exposure that you're not going to run towards. You don't need to do that, in my experience. You really don't need to do that. My greatest relief, in fact, this happened to me. I was actually on the treadmill at gym where I was usually experiment with all my different processes. And I don't know what made me do it that particular morning, but when the thoughts came, as I said, normally trial these different internal processes, these gymnastics to try and stop the thoughts, but I just went, just allow. And I thought, actually did an experiment. I said, okay, so for 5 minutes, I'm going to do, at the time I was doing a lot of this love thing. I was like, okay, I'm going to, face the thoughts with love, and then I'm going to face the thoughts with just letting them be. And I can tell you, oh my gosh, I don't know why it took me so many years to figure this out, but it was so clear. The allow was so much easier. It was so much less stressful. It was so much more soothing just to let it be there rather than trying to stop it. And all these things that I thought were positive, love and meditation, trying to stop, we're still trying to stop it. And Ken, what I really realized in that moment was the best way to stop it is to stop trying to stop it. Stop trying to stop it. Yeah. And just let it be there. Let it be there. Again, I know initially, that takes a bit to do that, but I promise you that's where the healing is. And yes, your anxiety might go up, But if you do this over time, you will reprogram your brain, you will rewire your brain. Okay, think of it like going exercise. You don't get the muscles you want automatically. The brain is like a muscle. It learns, it grows, right? And you will actually get new neural connections, and that transformation is going to happen over time. So honestly, here's what you need to do. The thought comes, the sensation comes. Firstly, understand your interpretation, right? It's okay. Everybody has these. There's no problem, okay? The only problem is because in effect you've made it a problem. Right? It's the thinking about the problem, right? Now that you know that, when it comes, understand it'll still bring anxiety because that's how your brain has learned that, right? So now the brain has to unlearn, right? So the brain learns through avoidance. Very clear, very important. The brain learns anxiety through avoidance. The brain unlearns anxiety through acceptance. That's it. So there's one thing you need to do. Allow. There's one thing you need to stop, and that's avoid. That's it. Allow the thoughts. Let them be there. Stop the avoidance. Now, there's different kinds of avoidance. Okay, remember, you would never have thought of meditation, deep breathing, deep relaxation, prayer, as avoidance. Those are forms of avoidance. Anything that you are doing to make it stop is a form of avoidance, right? And I can tell you the most pernicious form of avoidance, the thing that I never even realized was avoidance, was analysis. So what I would do was a lot of analysis of my intrusive thoughts. I would go, how many thoughts did I have today? How many did I have yesterday? I would review, right? We call this reviewing. Right? Oh, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Do I have more thoughts? Do I have less thoughts? I then do forecasting. Oh my gosh, I wonder if it's going to get worse tomorrow or better tomorrow. I wonder if what I'm doing is helping or hindering, right? This is all this analysis, right? Is what I'm doing working? Isn't it working? Should it stop? Now you wouldn't think that's a form of avoidance, but it is a form of avoidance. Of course it is, because what are you doing? You're saying, I don't want the thought, so I'm going to think about how to stop the thought. Right? If I'm thinking about how to stop the thought, that's avoiding the thought, right? Now I call this war, right? Worrying, analysis, and rumination. Worrying, analysis, and rumination. In fact, I was doing all three. I was worrying about the thoughts coming, more thoughts coming. I was analyzing the thoughts as they were coming, or analyzing them in the past. And rumination is when you think about what's happened before. So even thinking, I could think about some burst of intrusive thoughts that happened 2 days before, and what happened, and why did it happen, and what did I do, and do I need to do something different, and was it because I drank too much coffee or too little coffee, or was it because it was that person or the other person, or was it because it was my childhood sexual abuse? I can tell you, I thought far more about the thoughts than actually had the thoughts, right? All of this analysis. So that's all a defense mechanism. That's avoidance. So remember, we've got this neat little acronym, avoidance. There's 5 main forms of avoidance. There's avoidance itself, which usually is physical, so it doesn't really apply to intrusive thoughts, or it can be a physical thing. So sometimes people think, if I have this intrusive thought, I need to do a ritual. Like maybe if I was Catholic, I might do a Hail Mary, or, if it was a sexual thought, I might then quickly go and look at, let's say I have a homosexual intrusive thought, then I'm going to quickly look at heterosexual porn, masturbate to it, just to know that I actually can do that. So that's a physical form of avoidance, right? So if you're doing something out there in the world, right, to stop it, then it's avoidance, and it's going to make it worse. Better first, worse later, okay? Then you've got threat monitoring. Now, the acronym is ATWARS. Threat monitoring, oh man, that's a big one with intrusive thoughts. So what you're doing is, even when I'm not having the thoughts, I'm going, ooh, I wonder if the thought's there, right? I'm monitoring to see if the thought's there. So, it's like turning on the lights to see if the lights are on. Now, of course, if you look for the thought, you're going to find it, any thought that, you're looking for, you will find, just by nature of the fact that you actually just had it, by stating it. Okay, so threat monitoring is a very pernicious form of avoidance, and we do it. You can think of it externally. If you monitor, if you have a gun and you're looking for an intruder, that's a form of external threat monitoring. But now you're doing it with your own head. You're going, is there that thought? And this is, by the way, why suppression doesn't work. This is what the great psychologist, a Harvard psychologist, Daniel Wegner, discovered. And he called it ironic process theory. It's a very, very famous theory. And he was the one to really discover the science underneath this, that if you try not to think of something, chocolates, sexual thoughts, blasphemy, your mind then has to monitor to see whether you are effectively not thinking about it, right? And in monitoring to see if I'm not thinking about it, I start thinking about it, right? So that was why Wegner was the one who actually discovered that really, if there's something you don't want to think, don't try not think about it, right? Don't actually try to suppress it, because you're going to get this threat monitoring, right? So I had a lot of threat monitoring. So you've got avoidance, threat monitoring, and then worrying, analysis, rumination, which is all the overthinking, which are all forms of avoidance. And people find it a little strange because they go, surely when I'm worrying, I'm not avoiding because I'm thinking about it. No, because by worrying, you're actually projecting into the future. You're doing scenario planning, you're doing problem solving, you're doing solution finding, rather than actually just sitting. Because the truth is this, Ken, if there was one thing, there was actually a point with my own experience where I realized I want to say, you know what the solution is? Do nothing. That's the solution. Like, do nothing. Because it's the doing something that's telling your brain there's a problem that needs to be solved. Like what was one of my big things, like, there is no problem to solve. There's no problem here. Move on. Move on. There's no problem. I know that's tough for somebody out there who was like me, having thoughts so bad you're having suicidal thoughts, but still, it's coming out of the reason that it is so scary is because there's nothing you can do about it. And the reason there's nothing to do about it, because there is no actual problem. But you can't, like, how do you tell somebody to do nothing, right? So that's why we're not going to tell you to do that. I'm going to tell you what you can do. But that worrying, analysis, and rumination, that's a big one for me. And I can tell you that's the one thing. When I stopped doing that, I would say to you, I was effectively cured. It didn't happen overnight, but when I trained my brain that whenever those intrusive thoughts come in and I find myself, and it's like an itch, okay? You want to scratch it. It's like an itch. You want to scratch it so badly. But as long as I didn't scratch that itch, I just stopped thinking about it. And you'll have relapses. Don't worry. You will think about, but just you make the commitment, the effort. I'm not going to, because I know the thinking is not helpful. I would say to you, within a few weeks, I would call it a full cure. And I almost say that with a certain sadness, because I can't believe how much I went through for so many years. And if you ask me what I needed to do, simply allow. Now, I got at a point, right? So allow was great and massively reduced my anxiety, okay? Massively. What I didn't know is that even though I was allowing, I was still doing a fair bit of analysis. Am I allowing in the right way? Should I be allowing in this way? Maybe I should I say the word allow? Shouldn't I say, you know what I mean? Like, it's weird. Your brain like plays tricks on you. When I went, whoa, I'm not going to think about this. Now, Ken, this is very important, because then people say, but isn't that suppression? We've got two kinds of thoughts. We've got automatic thoughts and voluntary thoughts. Automatic thoughts pop into your head, okay? Those are the intrusive thoughts. Don't try and do anything with those babies, okay? Let them be. Voluntary thoughts are when I now decide to analyze those thoughts. Yeah? Are they bad? Are they getting worse? What do I need to do differently? Should I do it? Should I do this? Right? Now, the truth is there's a little bit of a fine line, because sometimes the voluntary thoughts pop into your mind as well, okay? And that's fine. Let them be there. Don't beat yourself up because you find yourself worrying, analyzing. Don't beat yourself up. Let those thoughts be there. But the moment you find yourself telling the story, doing this analysis, and you can feel it. It's voluntary. It's not an intrusion. It's a voluntary. Stop it. Now, I'm not saying that's always easy, because you like doing it. It makes you feel better, right? But you want to stop that, okay? So I can tell you, when I got to allow, I would say my anxiety reduced, oh my gosh, 70%, 60 to 70%. When I finally stopped any kind of thinking about the thoughts. I don't want to say, what is a cure? For me, the cure is not having the thoughts. That's not the cure. The cure is not having anxiety about the thoughts, and that completed my cure. Once I then stopped thinking about the thoughts, and that's why I said there's two things there. It's do allow, don't avoid. Do allow, don't avoid. For a long time, I was able to allow, but I was still doing a form of avoidance that I didn't even realize was a form of avoidance, which was this overthinking, this analysis. Yeah. Wow, Ken, this has been a big one, right? I guess when it's your own personal experience, you got lots to say about it.
Yeah, but it's been so informative. And I think, I've never fortunately suffered from intrusive thought myself. However, I can see how it can become so fully invasive and how it can take up so much of your life,
Yeah.
And I think you talking about allowing it and not fighting and resisting it, and also not engaging in at wars, and because I think we're so conditioned as human beings when we faced with a problem, any problem, external or internal, it's to worry, it's to analyze, it's to look for where the threats are, and going against our own nature seems like that's where people would be challenged the most.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I want to say something else here that I think might be instructive for people. In fact, two things before we close. The one thing is intrusive thoughts are actually considered a form of obsessive compulsive disorder. A lot of people don't realize this. It's actually considered a form of OCD. What is OCD? So OCD comes in many different forms. It means obsessive compulsive disorder. So a common one would be hand washing. So somebody feels anxious. They feel that they're impure, right? Their hands are dirty, germy. They're going to make themselves sick or somebody else sick. They feel anxious. They go wash their hands. They feel better. Okay, right? So the obsession is my hands have got germs that are going to infect me or someone else. That's the obsession. That's the intrusive thought, right? So OCD also has an intrusive thought, right? That's the thought is my hands are dirty and impure. The compulsion is the behavior. The compulsion is washing my hands, right? So washing my hands makes me feel better, but it reinforces the obsession, right? So now whenever I feel anxious, in fact, often anxiety that comes from other areas will then become associated with this particular obsession. And then when I wash my hands, the anxiety diminishes. The problem is now, whenever I feel anxious, I'm having that thought and I'm not having to wash my hands. And in the extreme, people with this form of OCD can wash their hands. Oh my gosh, it can go into, it can be over 100 times a day. It's so bad that their hands actually become blistered and they wash the skin of their hands, right? So that would be one form of OCD. There are many forms. Sometimes it's a ritual that you have to do before you pick up the phone or before you see something, whatever it is, right? But just to understand there, because there's an analogy here, intrusive thoughts is considered that it's actually called in the literature pure O. And what they mean by pure O is a pure obsession because there's no compulsion, right? Except they're wrong because there is a compulsion. It's just not external. So the obsession is the thoughts, right? These thoughts that are disturbing to this individual. The compulsion is what you do about the thoughts. So it could actually be a physical compulsion, like doing a Hail Mary or doing a prayer. In my case, what was the compulsion? I tried different compulsions, affirmations, meditation, deep breathing, doing some sort of extra technique, which all seems like great, but that was actually a compulsion. So you can see that it's very clearly this is a form of OCD, right? And we're going to talk OCD, right? We're going to have a how to get over OCD. But actually, the way that we get over OCD is stop the compulsion. The compulsion fuels the obsession. Now, you tell somebody who's been washing their hands all that time to stop washing their hands, their anxiety is going to go through the roof. But if they can sustain that through the techniques that we will learn through Transcender, their brain will soon learn they don't have to wash their hands to feel okay because actually they're not, contaminated and there is no impurity and they're okay. And so likewise with intrusive thoughts, what we want to do is, and that's why for anybody listening to this, try to identify what your form of avoidance is. what do you tend to do when you have an intrusive thought? You know, again, I've tried it all. So, but what are you currently doing? Are you analyzing it? Are you doing some sort of internal mental process to stop it? Whatever that thing is, you need to stop it. You need to stop it. So you have to allow the thought, and you need to stop that form of avoidance. Now, what in the moments is there anything specific? So, as you know, Cand, in Transcender, there is a process, and the process really is allow now, right? So when it happens, it's what am I allowing? I'm allowing whatever's going on in this moment. So allow now, allow the thought, allow the sensation, allow it to be. Now, of course, is an acronym. You can name it. So you could, if you like, say, oh, there's a thought. That's it. There's a sensation. Or you could just observe it. So just note it. Okay, it's a thought. It's a sensation. Or you could even, I'm not saying you have to do that right now, you could even welcome it. Just bring it on. It's life. It's reality. It's just this moment. It's an opportunity for me to grow and learn to be more accepting of the world and my life in general, right? So allow now. That's where you want it. So if you're looking for just something to, and I don't get too fixated on process, because you don't want to use allow as a defense mechanism. You know, when it comes to, okay, allow to actually stop it and make it go away, okay? That was like, it reminds me of an episode of Seinfeld, where Seinfeld's father was going around saying, serenity now, serenity now, serenity now. And, Seinfeld says, Dad, what were you doing? He says, no, I learned this at a personal development program. They said, if you get all, frustrated and angry, just tell yourself, serenity now, serenity. So no, I'm not saying scream at yourself to allow, okay? It's more an attitude that we're talking about developing here. We're developing just an attitude of acceptance where you can just let it be there. As uncomfortable it might be, it's actually tolerating the discomfort. I promise you, if you do this over time, the discomfort will dissolve. But initially there will be, just tolerate, let that be. Let the discomfort be. Let the thought be. Just let it be. I know it's not going to be pleasant at first, okay? But do what is hard now, your life will be easy. Do what is easy now, your life will be hard, okay? So just, you can do this, okay? You can do it. I promise you, if I can do it, you can do it. Just know, initially it's going to be tough, okay? You've been, for all these months, maybe years for some of you, you have been avoiding. So your brain, just like, be kind to yourself. That's be compassionate. Don't beat yourself up if you slip up as well. If you don't do it and you go back to your compulsion and back to just know what you're doing. You did it. It's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Be compassionate. Punishment doesn't work, and just get back on the wagon. Okay. This is an addiction, and it's actually it's a form of addiction. I was addicted to this meditation. I was addicted to these different ways that I was using to make this stop, right? The same as somebody with hand washing can be addicted to washing their hands. It's an addiction. It takes time, but it will get there. I promise you, it will get there. So allow now, all right? That thought comes in, allow now. You don't even have to say allow now. It's an attitude. You can if you want, but it's just an attitude. Allow now. Identify the form of avoidance you're currently using. What is it? What are you doing that when it comes, you make the stop by doing what? And that is the thing you need to stop. Okay, you'll have relapses, it's okay, but ultimately, do allow, don't avoid. Do allow, don't avoid. Do allow, don't avoid. Because as a rap artist, I would create something more musical than that. I wish I was, because I promise you that if I had that, I would have saved myself many years of torment. So this is why I'm so passionate about that. And I just hope for anybody out there who's listening to this, believe me, I've tried it all. Every major form of treatment, every major therapy, every process, every practice, every I mean, you know that I've tried it. This is what works. It takes a bit of time. I promise you, you do this within a few weeks, you are going to feel a difference. Okay. And remember, it's not about making thoughts go away. It's about being able to have the thoughts and not being disturbed by them, which again won't happen in day 1, 2, 3, or maybe even the first week 2 or 2, possibly even 3. But I promise you do this consistently. your anxiety will dissolve, and you will, if you do have these thoughts, they will really not matter. Do allow, don't avoid.
Wow, thank you, rap genius, Jeff. About time. No, really, thank you so much for sharing, Jess. This is yet another informative and just inspiring interview. So thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Ken, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Bye.